Remove these people immediately. I don't care what their tickets say. This is my suite, and I won't share it with them.
The champagne flute shattered against the polished marble floor of Suite 1A, sending crystal fragments across Italian leather seats. The woman who spoke blonde, stunning, draped in ivory. Saint Laurent stood like a queen surveying peasants who had dared to sit on her throne. Her manicured fingers pointed at a couple who had been peacefully celebrating their 20th anniversary just moments before. Before we dive into this story of power privilege and perfect revenge, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, because what you're about to witness happened in the skies above your heads. This isn't just another airline incident. This is the moment when entitlement met its match at 30,000 feet. In exactly 47 minutes, this woman's behavior will shut down an entire airline. Stock prices will crash, careers will end, lives will change forever. And she has absolutely no idea that the quiet man she's humiliating, the one sitting calmly in his navy cashmere sweater, owns the very sky she's flying through. Marcus Rivera didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand up. He didn't even set down his champagne glass. He simply looked at the woman with the kind of patience you learn after 20 years of military service and said 4 words that would echo through corporate boardrooms for months to come. "Ma'am, please calm down." But Isabella Whitmore, fashion influencer, trust fund princess, and owner of 2.3 million Instagram followers, had never been told to calm down in her entire pampered life. She had been given everything she'd ever wanted: private jets, designer clothes, and the kind of privilege that makes you forget other people are actually human beings. She was about to learn a lesson that money can't buy and followers can't save you from. The Meridian Airlines Airbus A380 sat on the tarmac at JFK International Airport, its massive frame gleaming under the terminal lights. Flight 447 to Milan was supposed to be routine, another luxury journey for the ultra-wealthy, another day in the life of an airline that catered to people who measured their worth in zeros. Instead, it became the stage for a reckoning that would transform an entire industry. Have you ever been told you don't belong somewhere you've paid to be? Have you ever watched someone use their privilege as a weapon against people who've done nothing wrong? If so, this story is for you, because sometimes justice doesn't just knock on the door. It kicks it down, walks in wearing a cashmere sweater, and speaks in a voice so calm it makes thunderstorms sound loud. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that true power doesn't scream. It whispers, and when it finally speaks, it changes everything. The suite that started this war cost $15,000. But the lesson it taught that was priceless. 2 hours before Isabella Whitmore would destroy her own life, Marcus Rivera sat in the Platinum Elite Lounge at JFK Terminal 5, watching his wife fall in love with a chocolate croissant. Simone Rivera, principal of Lincoln High School in Brooklyn, had insisted they arrive early for their anniversary trip, not because she was nervous about flying, but because she wanted to savor every moment of luxury. 20 years, Marcus said, softly reaching across the marble table to touch her hand. And you still get excited about hotel breakfast pastries. Simone laughed, that warm sound that had first made him fall in love with her at a coffee shop near Fort Bragg 2 decades ago. These aren't hotel pastries, Marcus. This is what happens when you actually splurge instead of booking us on those tiny business jets. She was right, of course. Marcus had built his career in private aviation, first as a Navy pilot flying missions he still couldn't discuss, then as a consultant, helping companies optimize their flight operations. For years, their travel had been purely functional quick hops between corporate headquarters, efficient flights that got him home to Brooklyn by dinner time. This trip was different. This trip was about them. Marcus studied his wife in the soft lounge lighting. At 41, Simone carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent 15 years teaching teenagers that respect was earned, not demanded. Her natural hair was styled in elegant twists, and she wore a champagne silk blouse that brought out the warmth in her dark eyes. She looked radiant, successful, exactly like the accomplished woman she had always been. But Marcus knew the real reason she was savoring this moment. They had both grown up without money, real money, the kind that bought $15,000 airline suites. Simone's parents had worked double shifts to keep food on the table. Marcus had joined the military partly because it was his only path to college. Everything they had now they had built together, one careful decision at a time. "Do you remember our first anniversary?" Simone asked, breaking off another piece of croissant. "That little Italian place in Queens where the waiter kept forgetting our order, and you insisted on paying because you'd just gotten your teaching certification," Marcus replied. $57 for both of us, and you left a $20 tip because you said the waiter looked tired. He had 3 kids and was working 2 jobs. Simone's eyes softened with the memory. "You know what I love about this?" She gestured around the lounge, taking in the leather furniture, the attentive service, the quiet luxury. "It's not just that we can afford it now, it's that we still remember what it feels like when you can't." Marcus squeezed her hand. She had no idea how much money he'd actually made when he sold his consulting firm to Apex Global Holdings 3 years ago. The sale had been quiet-handled through shell companies and non-disclosure agreements. To Simone, he was just a successful aviation consultant who had finally decided to slow down and enjoy life. She didn't know he now owned controlling interest in half the airlines they'd ever flown. Marcus preferred it that way. Power, real power, worked best when it stayed quiet. He had learned that lesson in the military, refined it in business, and lived it every day in their Brooklyn neighborhood where he was just Mr. Rivera, the guy who helped kids with their math homework and fixed neighbors' cars on weekends. Flight 447 to Milan first-class passengers may now begin boarding, the lounge attendant announced. Simone's face lit up like Christmas morning. "That's us. We're first-class passengers, Marcus. On our 20th anniversary, flying to Italy in a private suite." She stood up, smoothing her blouse. "I feel like Cinderella." Marcus followed her toward the boarding gate, carrying both their bags despite her protests. In his navy cashmere sweater and dark jeans, he looked exactly like what he was, a successful man enjoying a well-earned vacation with the woman he loved. He had no idea that in less than an hour he would be forced to reveal a truth he'd kept hidden for 3 years. He had no idea that a spoiled socialite with too much time and too little sense would push him past the point of quiet diplomacy. Most importantly, he had no idea that this anniversary trip would become the most expensive lesson in respect that the aviation industry had ever witnessed. As they walked toward their gate, Simone slipped her arm through his. "Promise me something," she said, "anything. No work calls, no consulting emergencies, no mysterious phone conversations about operational efficiencies or whatever it is you actually do." She looked up at him with mock seriousness. "For the next 10 days, you're just my husband." "Deal." Marcus kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her favorite lavender shampoo. "Deal," he said, meaning it completely. He had no way of knowing that promise would be impossible to keep. While Marcus and Simone Rivera were falling in love with chocolate croissants, Isabella Whitmore was destroying a hotel manager's day at the St. Regis Manhattan. She stood in the marble lobby, her ivory Saint Laurent blazer cut to perfection, her platinum blonde hair arranged in a chignon that had taken her stylist 2 hours to achieve. "Do you understand who I am?" Isabella's voice carried the particular tone of someone who had never been told no in her entire 29 years of existence. The hotel manager, a tired-looking man named Peterson, shifted uncomfortably behind his mahogany desk. "Miss Whitmore, I completely understand your position, but—" "My position," Isabella laughed a sound like breaking crystal. "My position is that I am Isabella Whitmore. My father owns Whitmore Technologies. I have 2.3 million followers across social platforms. When I post a review of this hotel, and I will, those followers listen." She leaned forward, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the lobby's chandelier light. "Now, I've asked for a very simple thing. I want the presidential suite comped for tonight because your elevator was 30 seconds slow yesterday. That's not unreasonable. That's customer service." Peterson's hands trembled slightly as he typed on his computer. "I've authorized a 50% discount on the suite, Miss Whitmore. It's the best I can." 50%. Isabella's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Do you think my social media presence is worth 50%? Do you think my father's business connections are worth 50% behind her Dylan Torres? Her assistant photographer and reluctant witness to these daily humiliations adjusted the camera settings on his phone. He'd been documenting Isabella's life for 3 years, turning her tantrums into content for an audience that seemed to love watching wealth behave badly. Dylan was 26 Hispanic and desperately needed this job to pay for his mother's cancer treatments. He'd graduated from NYU Film School with dreams of making documentaries about social justice. Instead, he spent his days filming a privileged woman who treated service workers like personal entertainment. Miss Whitmore Peterson tried again, his voice tight with forced politeness. The suite is $12,000 per night. A 50% discount saves you $6,000. I think that's quite generous for an elevator delay. Isabella stared at him like he'd spoken in a foreign language. The concept of money having actual value of $6,000 being significant to anyone was completely alien to her experience. Her monthly allowance from her father's trust fund was more than most people's annual salary. Her shopping budget exceeded the GDP of small countries. You know what? Isabella pulled out her phone, a custom iPhone encrusted with actual diamonds. Let's let my followers decide if you're being reasonable. She switched to Instagram Live, and within seconds, her viewing audience climbed toward 5,000. Isabella had mastered the art of turning every minor inconvenience into viral content. Her followers loved watching her fight for respect against service workers who dared to treat her like a normal customer. "Hey, gorgeous humans," she purred into the camera, her voice switching to the saccharine tone she used for social media. "Isabella here. And I'm dealing with some serious discrimination at the St. Regis." This manager, she flipped the camera toward Peterson, who immediately tried to duck out of frame, thinks that a 50% discount makes up for terrible service. The comments started flowing immediately, a mix of supportive followers and increasingly critical voices. Isabella had noticed the criticism growing lately, but she attributed it to jealousy. People were just mad that she could afford things they couldn't. Anyway, darlings, I can't let this slide. If we don't demand better, we'll never get it. She ended the stream and slipped the phone back into her Hermès bag. "I'll be posting a full review later, Peterson. Make sure your corporate office sees it." She turned on her custom Louboutin heels and swept toward the exit, Dylan trailing behind her with their luggage cart. The afternoon sun hit her perfectly as they stepped onto Fifth Avenue, and she paused to let Dylan capture a few shots for her Instagram story. "Flight to Milan is in 3 hours, Dylan said, quietly checking his phone. "Car should be here in 10 minutes. Perfect. And Dylan, make sure you get good footage on the plane. I want to show everyone what real luxury travel looks like." Isabella's smile was predatory. Flying first class on Meridian Airlines isn't just about the destination. It's about the experience, the service, the respect. She had no idea that in 3 hours she would encounter 2 passengers who had paid for the exact same experience. She had no idea that her definition of respect was about to collide with someone who understood the difference between dignity earned and privilege inherited. Most importantly, Isabella Whitmore had no idea that her social media audience, the followers who had enabled her behavior for years, was about to watch her learn the most expensive lesson of her life. The black Escalade pulled up to the curb, and Isabella slid into the leather back seat like a queen, claiming her throne. Dylan loaded their bags, 7 pieces for a 4-day trip, while Isabella immediately began scrolling through the comments on her hotel video. Dylan booked the usual suite on the plane. "I want 1A. I always sit in 1A. "Already done," Dylan replied, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. But Isabella, I should mention, the booking system showed that 1A might be what Isabella didn't look up from her phone. Nothing. Never mind, I'm sure it'll be fine. Dylan Torres would later realize that this was the moment he should have warned her. This was the moment he could have prevented everything that followed. But he stayed quiet because that's what assistant to Isabella Whitmore meant. Stay quiet, film everything, and hope that someday you'll earn enough money to escape. The Escalade pulled away from the curb, carrying Isabella toward JFK Airport, toward Flight 447, toward the most public humiliation of her privileged life. Captain Elena Rodriguez had been flying for Meridian Airlines for 15 years, and she'd never seen a crew manifest like the one for Flight 447. The passenger list read like a Fortune 500 directory mixed with a social media influencer convention, but it was the special notations that caught her attention. Tommy, she called to her lead flight attendant as they completed their pre-flight check. "What's the story with Suite 1? A Tommy Santos looked up from his tablet. His Hispanic features creased with concern. At 32, he'd worked in airline service for 8 years, long enough to recognize potential problems before they became actual disasters. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about, Captain. We have a situation." Elena settled into the pilot's seat, adjusting her uniform jacket. As the single mother of 2 teenage daughters, she'd learned to handle complicated situations with a combination of authority and patience. "Talk to me." The Whitmore party specifically requested Suite 1A. "They've flown with us 12 times in the past year, always in that suite. Isabella Whitmore has some kind of arrangement with corporate. Her father's company does business with Meridian's parent company." Tommy's voice dropped. "But 1A was already booked, months ago. Anniversary celebration for a couple named Rivera." Elena frowned. "So, what did corporate do?" "That's just it. They didn't do anything. Both bookings are still active in the system." Someone upstairs decided to let it sort itself out on the ground. Tommy shook his head. "I've been doing this long enough to know that's corporate speak for not my problem." Through the cockpit window, Elena could see ground crew preparing the jetway. Maria Lopez, the gate agent, was directing the process with her usual precision. Maria had worked JFK for 12 years, and Elena had come to rely on her professional judgment during difficult boarding situations. "What's your read on the Rivera passengers?" Elena asked. "Quiet, polite, celebrating their 20th anniversary. They seem like genuinely nice people." Tommy paused. "The kind of passengers who make this job worth doing." Elena had seen enough entitled passengers to know the type. There were people who flew first class because they'd worked hard and saved for something special, and there were people who flew first class because they'd never known any other way to live. The difference usually became obvious within the first 5 minutes. In the Whitmore party, Tommy's expression said everything. She live-streamed her entire boarding process last month and criticized 3 different crew members by name. Corporate made us all watch the video during our sensitivity training. Sensitivity to what? To the fact that social media influencers can destroy careers with a single post. Tommy's voice carried the weariness of someone who loved his job, but hated some of the people it required him to serve. "I've got a mortgage and a kid starting college. I can't afford to be the subject of someone's viral video." Elena understood the pressure. Airlines had become obsessed with social media perception, especially among high-profile passengers. A single negative viral video could cost millions in lost bookings. But that same obsession had created a culture where crew members were afraid to enforce basic standards of behavior. "Here's what we're going to do," Elena said firmly. "We follow company policy. First, come first served on boarding. The Rivera passengers are already seated, so that's where they stay. If Miss Whitmore has a problem with that, she can take it up with customer service." Tommy looked relieved. "And if she makes a scene, then we handle it professionally. We document everything, and we remember that our job is to ensure safety and security for all passengers, not just the ones with social media followers." Elena's voice carried the authority of someone who'd landed planes in combat zones. "I've dealt with worse than Instagram influencers, Tommy, trust me." As they spoke, Maria Lopez was dealing with her own concerns at the gate. She'd processed both bookings and knew exactly what was about to happen when the Whitmore party arrived. Maria had immigrated from El Salvador 15 years ago and had worked her way up from cleaning crew to gate agent through pure determination and attention to detail. She believed in rules. Rules were what separated professional service from chaos. Rules were what protected people like her from people who thought their money made them immune to consequences. Maria checked her watch. The Rivera passengers had boarded 30 minutes ago, escorted personally to Suite 1A by the premium service team. They'd been polite, grateful, and clearly excited about their anniversary celebration. The Whitmore party was due to arrive any moment. Maria had seen situations like this before. Usually, the airline found a way to accommodate the high-profile passenger even if it meant disappointing someone else. Usually, the person with more money won. But something about this situation felt different. Something about the quiet confidence of Marcus Rivera, the way he'd thanked her for her help, the military bearing he carried without making a show of it. Maria Lopez was about to witness a master class in the difference between real power and borrowed privilege. She just didn't know it yet. Suite 1A was everything the brochure had promised and more. Marcus and Simone Rivera stepped into their private cabin and Simone actually gasped. The space was larger than some New York apartments, polished walnut paneling, cream Italian leather seats that converted into a full-size bed and a bathroom with an actual shower. "This is insane," Simone whispered, running her hand along the smooth surface of their dining table. "Marcus, this is absolutely insane. People live like this." A bottle of Dom Perignon, 2010, sat chilling in a crystal ice bucket flanked by 2 Baccarat champagne flutes. Fresh white orchids adorned every surface, and the lighting was warm and intimate, like an upscale restaurant rather than an airplane cabin. Tommy Santos appeared with a warm smile carrying a leather folder. "Mr. and Mrs. Rivera, welcome aboard Meridian Airlines Flight 447. I'm Tommy, your personal flight attendant for today's journey. Is this your first time in our residence suite? First and probably last," Marcus replied, settling into his seat. "This is our 20th anniversary gift to ourselves." "Congratulations," Tommy said warmly. 20 years is an incredible achievement. The captain asked me to let you know that we'll be making a special announcement in your honor once we're airborne. Simone beamed. "That's so thoughtful." "Thank you." Tommy opened the folder and began explaining the suite's amenities. The seat controls the entertainment system, the call button for service. Everything was designed to make passengers feel like they were in a private jet rather than a commercial aircraft. We'll be serving a 7-course tasting menu prepared by Chef Antoine Dubois, paired with wines selected by our sommelier. If you have any dietary restrictions or special requests, just let me know. Tommy's pride in his service was evident. "We want this to be an absolutely perfect experience." Marcus was already making mental notes, his consultant's mind automatically assessing the operation. The attention to detail was impressive, every surface pristine, every interaction carefully choreographed, every element designed to justify the $15,000 price tag. But more than that, the service felt genuine. Tommy Santos wasn't just going through the motions. He clearly took pride in creating memorable experiences for passengers who had probably saved for months to afford this level of luxury. "Can I ask you something?" Simone said as Tommy poured their champagne. "How long have you been doing this?" 8 years with Meridian, 12 years in aviation service total, Tommy replied. "I started as a ground crew member and worked my way up. Best job I've ever had, honestly. I love meeting people from all over the world, hearing their stories." "That's wonderful," Simone said. As a principal, she recognized the signs of someone who genuinely enjoyed helping others. It shows in how you treat people. Tommy smiled and withdrew discreetly, leaving them to enjoy their private celebration. Simone raised her champagne glass, the crystal catching the cabin's soft lighting. "To 20 years, she said. "To 20 more, Marcus replied, clinking his glass against hers. The champagne was perfect, crisp, complex, exactly the kind of luxury they'd never indulged in before. Simone took a sip and closed her eyes, savoring both the taste and the moment. "I keep waiting for someone to tell us there's been a mistake," she admitted. "Like, they'll check our credit cards and realize we're just normal people from Brooklyn." Marcus laughed. "We earned this, Simone. You've worked 60-hour weeks for 15 years dealing with budget cuts and bureaucrats and teenagers who think they know everything. I've been traveling constantly, missing dinners and school plays and anniversary dinners. Not all of them," Simone protested. "Too many of them." Marcus took her hand across the small table. "This trip isn't just about having money now. It's about finally having time. Time to remember why we fell in love. Time to plan what comes next. Simone squeezed his hand. What comes next is you actually retiring instead of pretending to retire while secretly consulting for half the aviation industry. I'm working on that, Marcus said, meaning it. The sale to Apex Global was supposed to have been his exit strategy, but the company had kept pulling him back for special projects. Important projects. Projects that required his security clearance and his understanding of both military and civilian aviation operations. Projects he couldn't tell his wife about. I love you, Simone said simply. I love you too. They sat in comfortable silence watching through their window as ground crews prepared the massive aircraft for departure. Other first-class passengers were boarding, now visible through the partially open suite door. Business executives, tech entrepreneurs, and what looked like a fashion shoot happening in the aisle. Oh my God, is that Isabella Whitmore, Simone whispered, recognizing the blonde woman posing for photos near the galley. She's that influencer, the one who's always posting about luxury travel. Marcus glanced toward the commotion. A young man with professional camera equipment was directing the photo shoot, while flight attendants waited patiently to continue their pre-flight service. Should we know who that is? Marcus asked. She has like 3 million followers or something. My students are always showing me her videos. Simone wrinkled her nose slightly. She's a lot, but I guess when you can afford to fly like this all the time, you get used to being the center of attention. As if summoned by their conversation, Isabella Whitmore's voice carried clearly across the first-class cabin. She was speaking to someone on her phone, her tone sharp and demanding. Dylan, I don't care what the booking system says. I always sit in 1A. Always. Fix this. Tommy Santos appeared in their doorway, his expression professional but slightly strained. Mr. and Mrs. Rivera, I apologize for the disturbance. We're just working through some seating logistics. Please don't worry, your suite reservation is completely confirmed. Simone felt a flicker of concern. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, Tommy assured her. Just normal first-class logistics. Please enjoy your champagne. I'll be back shortly with some appetizers. As Tommy walked away, Marcus watched him intercept Isabella Whitmore near the galley. Even from a distance, Marcus could read the body language of the conversation. Tension, frustration, the kind of customer service challenge that could escalate quickly if not handled correctly. Marcus had seen similar situations during his military career moments when competing interests and inflated egos created unnecessary conflict. Usually these situations resolved themselves through compromise and professional de-escalation. Sometimes they didn't. Marcus Simone said quietly, I think that woman is coming this way. Marcus turned toward the suite entrance just as Isabella Whitmore appeared in their doorway, Dylan Torres filming behind her. She looked at them both with the expression of someone who had discovered squatters in her vacation home. Excuse me, Isabella said, her voice carrying the particular entitlement of someone who had never been refused anything in her life. I think there's been some kind of mistake. I'm sorry, miss, but there's no mistake, Marcus said calmly, not bothering to stand. 20 years of marriage had taught him to recognize brewing storms, and Simone's hand was already reaching for his arm, her subtle signal that trouble was approaching. Isabella Whitmore stepped fully into their suite, Dylan Torres trailing behind with his camera. She moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to taking up space wherever she went, her ivory Saint Laurent blazer catching the cabin's warm lighting. I'm Isabella Whitmore, she announced as if her name should rearrange reality around her presence. This is Suite 1A. This is where I sit. Always. Simone set down her champagne glass carefully, her principal instincts kicking in. She'd handled thousands of difficult conversations with entitled parents who believed their money should buy exceptions to school policy. Miss Whitmore, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding, Simone said diplomatically, but we've been seated here for almost 30 minutes. Our boarding passes clearly show I don't care what your boarding passes show. Isabella interrupted, her voice rising. Dylan, are you getting this? Because this is exactly the kind of discrimination I've been talking about. Dylan Torres reluctantly raised his camera, but Marcus could see the discomfort in the young man's eyes. This wasn't the first time Dylan had been forced to document Isabella's confrontations with innocent people. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet authority he'd learned commanding flight operations. "Perhaps you should speak with the flight crew. I'm sure they can help resolve whatever booking confusion occurred." Isabella's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Booking confusion? There's no confusion. You're sitting in my seat. The solution is very simple. You move." Tommy Santos appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. "Miss Whitmore, please, if we could just step out to the galley." "No," Tommy Isabella said without turning around. "We're going to solve this right here, right now. I'm not playing musical chairs with passengers who clearly don't understand airline etiquette." The phrase, airline etiquette, hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd spent 15 years ensuring that military aircraft operations ran smoothly, safely, and professionally. He'd consulted with airlines across 6 continents on operational efficiency and customer experience. And now, this woman, this trust fund princess with a camera crew, was lecturing him about airline etiquette. Isabella Dillon said quietly, "Maybe we should let the airline staff handle this. Dillon, stop talking and keep filming." Isabella snapped. "My followers need to see how these companies treat loyal customers. When you're a VIP, when you're actually important, you shouldn't have to fight for basic respect." Simone's grip on Marcus's arm tightened. As a school principal, she'd learned to recognize the moment when a difficult conversation crossed the line from frustration into something uglier. Miss Whitmore Simone said firmly, "We understand you're disappointed about your seating, but we paid for this suite just like you did. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary and your anniversary." Isabella laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. How sweet. But here's the thing. Some passengers matter more than others. Some passengers understand that airlines have hierarchies. Some passengers know their place. The cabin fell silent. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, not anger exactly, but a cold crystalline clarity. In his military career, he'd encountered officers who believed their rank gave them the right to humiliate subordinates. In business, he'd met executives who thought their wealth exempted them from basic human decency. But this was different. This was personal. Tommy Marcus said quietly, not taking his eyes off Isabella. "Perhaps you could call the captain. I think we need some clarification about airline policies." "Already on it," Tommy replied, his voice tight with professional strain. Isabella turned back to Marcus, her blue eyes flashing with the particular fury of someone unaccustomed to resistance. "You know what, fine. Call whoever you want. But I'm not moving until this gets sorted out properly." She sat down uninvited in the chair across from their table, Dylan reluctantly continuing to film. Isabella's Instagram live stream was already attracting thousands of viewers, the comments flowing faster than Dylan could read them. "So, here we are. Gorgeous humans." Isabella purred into the camera, her voice switching to the saccharine tone she used for social media. "Flying Meridian Airlines, paying for first-class service, and dealing with passengers who seem to think their tickets matter more than customer loyalty." Marcus watched her perform, recognizing something he'd seen in combat zones. The dangerous combination of fear and arrogance that made people do stupider things than they'd ever imagined possible. "This is the problem with airlines today," Isabella continued to her audience. "They let anyone buy first-class tickets, but they don't understand that some passengers deserve priority treatment. Real VIP service. Not just anyone with a credit card." Isabella Dillon whispered urgently, "The comments are getting pretty negative." "The comments are from jealous people who can't afford this lifestyle," Isabella replied without lowering her voice. "They don't understand what it's like to maintain standards." Simone looked at Marcus, her eyes wide with disbelief. In 15 years of dealing with difficult parents, she'd never encountered anything quite like this, someone so completely insulated from consequences that they couldn't recognize when they were destroying themselves in real time. Captain Elena Rodriguez appeared in the suite doorway, her uniform crisp and her expression professional but firm. Behind her stood Sarah Mitchell, the flight's senior purser, and Maria Lopez from the gate crew. "Good afternoon," Captain Rodriguez said calmly. "I understand we have a seating question that needs to be resolved." Isabella immediately stood, her demeanor shifting to the charm offensive she used with authority figures. "Captain, thank you so much for coming. I'm Isabella Whitmore. You might know my father, Richard Whitmore, from Whitmore Technologies. We've been loyal Meridian customers for years, and there seems to be some confusion about my usual suite." Captain Rodriguez looked at Tommy Santos. "What's the booking status?" "Both parties have confirmed reservations for Suite 1, Tommy replied. "The Rivera passengers boarded first and are properly seated according to their boarding passes." "Then the matter is resolved," Captain Rodriguez said simply. "Miss Whitmore, our customer service team can help you find alternate accommodations." "Alternate accommodations?" Isabella's voice rose to a pitch that made Dylan wince. "Captain, I don't think you understand who I am." Captain Rodriguez had commanded passenger aircraft through thunderstorms and emergency landings. She dealt with air rage medical emergencies and security threats. Isabella Whitmore's tantrum barely registered on her scale of serious problems. "Miss Whitmore, I understand exactly who you are. You're a passenger on my aircraft, and you'll follow the same boarding procedures as everyone else." Isabella Whitmore stared at Captain Rodriguez as if the woman had spoken in ancient Sanskrit. The concept that airline rules might apply to her, Isabella Whitmore, daughter of a tech billionaire owner of 2.3 million social media followers, was so foreign that she couldn't immediately process it. "I'm sorry," Isabella said finally, her voice dripping with the kind of false politeness that preceded nuclear warfare, "but I don't think you heard me correctly. I said I'm Isabella Whitmore. My father's company does significant business with Meridian Airlines." Significant business. Captain Rodriguez remained impassive. "Ma'am, I don't care if your father owns Mars. On this aircraft, everyone follows the same safety and boarding procedures." Dylan Torres shifted nervously behind his camera, watching Isabella's face cycle through several shades of pink. He'd seen this expression before, usually right before Isabella destroyed someone's career with a carefully crafted social media assault. "Dylan, are you getting all of this?" Isabella asked without turning around. "Because this is exactly the kind of discrimination that my followers need to see. This captain is refusing to provide customer service to a VIP passenger." Isabella Dylan whispered urgently, "Maybe we should just take another seat. No." Isabella's voice cut through the cabin like a knife. "I'm not rewarding bad service by accepting whatever scraps they want to throw at me." She pulled out her diamond-encrusted phone and opened Instagram Live. "Hey, gorgeous humans, Isabella, here with a live update from 30,000 feet of pure discrimination." The viewer count immediately began climbing. Thousands of followers tuning in to watch their favorite influencer fight for justice against incompetent airline staff. Marcus Rivera watched the performance with the detached fascination of someone observing a natural disaster. He'd seen enough entitled behavior during his military career to recognize the type people who confused privilege with power and had never learned the difference. Simone, however, was struggling to maintain her composure. As a school principal, she'd spent 15 years dealing with parents who believed their money should buy exceptions to rules. But even the worst helicopter parent had never behaved like this. "You know what the problem is?" Isabella continued playing to her phone camera while gesturing around the suite. "These airlines have forgotten that loyalty matters. That VIP status means something. That some passengers deserve better treatment than others." She turned the camera toward Marcus and Simone, who remained seated calmly at their table. "I mean, look at this situation. These people—" She paused, her eyes narrowing as she really looked at the couple for the first time. "These people clearly don't understand the hierarchy of air travel." The phrase hung in the cabin air like poison gas. Captain Rodriguez felt her jaw clench. In 15 years of flying, she developed a sixth sense for conversations that were about to cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed. "Miss Whitmore, I'm going to need you to." Captain Marcus Rivera spoke for the first time since the confrontation began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard. Perhaps Miss Whitmore could explain what she means by these people. Isabella's live stream audience had grown to over 8,000 viewers, and the comments were becoming increasingly heated. Some supported Isabella's fight against bad service, but others were beginning to question her behavior and language. I mean, people who don't understand airline etiquette, Isabella replied, but her voice carried a nervous edge. People who don't understand that frequent flyers deserve priority treatment. We've been flying for over 20 years, Simone said calmly. My husband has probably logged more air miles than most people will see in their lifetime. We understand airline etiquette just fine. Sarah Mitchell, the senior purser, stepped forward. Miss Whitmore, our records show that Mr. and Mrs. Rivera hold Platinum Elite status with our rewards program. They qualify for every VIP service we offer. Isabella's social media smile wavered. Well, status can be earned in different ways. Some people get status because of who they are, not just because they buy tickets. Who they are, Marcus repeated softly. The cabin fell silent except for the ambient noise of the aircraft's engines and air circulation systems. Even Dylan Torres lowered his camera slightly, sensing that something fundamental had shifted in the room. Tommy Santos had worked in customer service long enough to recognize the moment when a difficult situation became a crisis. Captain, maybe we should know, Captain Rodriguez said firmly. Miss Whitmore, I want to hear you explain exactly what you mean by that comment. Isabella looked around the cabin, suddenly aware that every crew member was staring at her. Her Instagram live stream was approaching 10,000 viewers, and the comments had become a mix of support and increasingly sharp criticism. I mean that some passengers have earned their status through family connections and business relationships, Isabella said, her voice rising defensively. Some passengers have contributed to the airline industry through investments and partnerships. Some passengers matter more because of their broader impact on the company. Marcus Rivera set down his champagne glass with the careful precision of someone who had just made a decision. And you believe that your broader impact gives you the right to remove my wife and me from our paid seats. I believe in customer service hierarchies, Isabella replied. I believe in treating VIP passengers with appropriate respect. I believe, she gestured broadly at the suite her designer bangles catching the light. I believe that when you're somebody, you shouldn't have to fight for what you've earned. What exactly have you earned? Simone asked quietly. Isabella's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The question was so simple, so direct, that it cut through years of reinforced privilege like a laser through tissue paper. I've earned respect, Isabella said finally. I've earned recognition. I've earned the right to be treated appropriately for who I am. And who are you? Marcus asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Isabella had built her entire identity around being somebody, the daughter of wealth, the owner of followers, the possessor of privilege. But when forced to articulate what she had actually accomplished, what she had actually earned through her own efforts, she found herself strangely speechless. I'm Isabella Whitmore, she repeated, as if her name was an argument in itself. Captain Rodriguez had heard enough. Miss Whitmore, you have exactly two choices. You can accept alternate seating arrangements that our crew will be happy to provide, or you can be removed from this aircraft for disrupting other passengers' travel experience. Isabella's face flushed red. You can't remove me from this flight. My father will have your job. I'll post about this. I'll make sure everyone knows how Meridian Airlines treats its VIP customers. Ma'am? Captain Rodriguez replied with the patience of someone who had navigated aircraft through hurricane conditions. I've been flying for 15 years. I've handled security threats, medical emergencies, and weather disasters. Your social media followers don't impress me, and your father's money doesn't give you the right to harass other passengers. Dylan Torres, still filming, reluctantly watched Isabella's face cycle through emotions he'd never seen before. For 3 years, he'd documented her privileged life, watching her use money and influence to reshape reality around her desires. This was the first time he'd ever seen someone refuse to be moved by her performance. This is discrimination, Isabella said finally, her voice cracking slightly. This is about more than seating. This is about respect. This is about... She looked directly at Marcus and Simone. This is about people knowing their place. The words landed like a physical blow. Marcus Rivera stood up slowly, his movement so controlled and deliberate that it commanded immediate attention from everyone in the suite. At 6 feet tall, with the bearing of someone who had commanded respect in life or death situations, he suddenly seemed to fill the entire cabin. "Our place," Marcus repeated quietly. Isabella's Instagram live stream had reached 12,000 viewers, and the comment section had become a battleground. Followers were arguing about everything from airline etiquette to social justice, with increasing numbers of people questioning Isabella's behavior and language. "I think," Marcus said, with the kind of calm that preceded thunderstorms, "it's time we discussed exactly who belongs where." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Marcus Simone whispered, recognizing something in her husband's posture that she hadn't seen since his military days. "It's okay, sweetheart," Marcus replied softly, never taking his eyes off Isabella. "It's time for some clarity." He dialed a number from memory and lifted the phone to his ear. "Legal, it's Marcus. I need you to implement Emergency Protocol 7 for Meridian Airlines Flight 447. Isabella's confident smile wavered. "What are you doing? Who are you calling?" Marcus looked at her with the expression of someone who had finally run out of patience for foolishness. "I'm calling my lawyers, Miss Whitmore, because you're absolutely right, some passengers do matter more than others. Some passengers do have more influence than others. Some passengers can change an airline's entire operational structure with a single phone call." He paused, his dark eyes never leaving Isabella's increasingly pale face. "The question is, which passenger are you and which passenger am I?" Isabella Whitmore's confident smile began to crack like ice under pressure. She'd spent her entire adult life using mysterious phone calls and vague threats to get what she wanted, but something about Marcus Rivera's demeanor suggested his call was different, more real, more dangerous. "Who exactly do you think you're calling?" Isabella asked, but her voice carried a note of uncertainty that Dylan Torres had never heard before. Marcus held up one finger, not dismissive, just indicating he needed a moment to finish his conversation. "Yes, I understand the protocols. 47 minutes until implementation, thank you." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket with the deliberate precision of someone who had just set wheels in motion that couldn't be stopped. "I was calling my legal team," Marcus said calmly. "The same team that handles operational oversight for several major airlines, including this one." Captain Rodriguez felt something shift in the atmosphere of the cabin. She'd been flying long enough to recognize when a situation had layers she didn't understand, and Marcus Rivera's phone call carried the weight of someone who knew exactly which numbers to dial. Oversight for airlines. Isabella repeated her live stream, still broadcasting to over 14,000 viewers. "What kind of oversight?" "The kind that determines whether airlines maintain their operating certificates," Marcus replied. "The kind that reviews safety protocols, staffing decisions, and customer service standards. The kind that can ground an entire fleet pending investigation." Tommy Santos felt his stomach drop. He'd worked in aviation long enough to know that when someone mentioned operating certificates in the context of customer service incidents, careers were about to end badly. "You're bluffing," Isabella said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "You're some random passenger trying to sound important." Marcus looked at her with something approaching pity. "Miss Whitmore, in the past 10 minutes you've accused my wife and me of not knowing our place, suggested that some passengers matter more than others based on who they are rather than what they've paid, and live-streamed yourself harassing paying customers." He gestured around the luxurious suite. "Do you have any idea how much negative publicity this aircraft manufacturer, this airline, and this airport could face if your behavior continues to be broadcast to thousands of people?" Dylan Torres watched Isabella's face cycle through several shades of pale. As her videographer, he'd been monitoring the live stream comments, and they had taken a decidedly negative turn. What had started as support for Isabella's fight against bad service had become a stream of criticism about her entitled behavior and questionable language. The negative publicity, Isabella laughed, but it sounded forced. "I'm creating negative publicity. I'm the one being discriminated against here, are you?" Simone Rivera asked quietly. She'd remained seated throughout the confrontation, but her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 15 years mediating conflicts between teenagers with overactive egos. "Because from where I'm sitting, you walked into our paid suite, demanded we leave, filmed us without permission, and made several comments that sounded suspiciously like—" She paused. "Well, like discrimination." Isabella's phone buzzed with notifications. Her Instagram live stream was attracting attention from major social media aggregators, and not the kind of attention she wanted. Screenshots of her comments were being shared across Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit, often accompanied by critiques of her behavior and language. "This is ridiculous," Isabella said, but she was scrolling through notifications on her phone, and her face was growing paler with each swipe. "I'm not discriminating against anyone. I'm just fighting for proper customer service." Captain Rodriguez had reached the limit of her patience. "Miss Whitmore, you have exactly 60 seconds to accept alternative seating arrangements, or I will have you removed from this aircraft for disrupting other passengers." "You can't remove me," Isabella replied automatically, but her voice lacked conviction. "I'll sue. I'll post about this. I'll make sure everyone knows everyone already knows, Dylan," Torres said quietly, speaking for the first time since the confrontation began. "Isabella, the live stream has 16,000 viewers, and they're not on your side." Isabella stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. Dylan had been her loyal assistant for 3 years, documenting her lifestyle, enabling her behavior, never questioning her treatment of service workers or strangers. "What do you mean, they're not on my side?" Dylan held up his phone, showing her the comment stream flowing across her Instagram Live. "They're calling you entitled. They're saying you're being racist. They're asking why you think you can treat people like this just because you have money." Isabella grabbed the phone from his hands, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she scrolled through hundreds of comments criticizing her behavior. For someone whose entire identity was built around social media validation, the sudden wave of negative feedback was devastating. "These are just jealous people," Isabella whispered, but her voice shook. "They don't understand luxury travel. They don't understand VIP service." Marcus Rivera watched her process the collapse of her social media support with the detached interest of someone observing a chemical reaction. He'd seen similar breakdowns during his military career moments when people who relied entirely on external validation suddenly found themselves isolated and exposed. Miss Whitmore Marcus said gently, "Perhaps this would be a good time to end your live stream and have a private conversation about how we resolve this situation." Isabella looked around the cabin wildly, suddenly aware that she was surrounded by airline crew passengers and her own assistant, all of whom were staring at her with expressions ranging from professional concern to outright disapproval. "I don't need to have a private conversation," Isabella said, but her voice was rising toward panic. "I need this situation fixed. I need proper customer service. I need—" She turned back to Captain Rodriguez. "I need to speak to whoever is actually in charge here." Captain Rodriguez exchanged glances with Tommy Santos and Sarah Mitchell. The crew had been trying to de-escalate the situation professionally, but Isabella's behavior was creating exactly the kind of incident that Airline spent millions trying to avoid. Miss Whitmore, Captain Rodriguez said carefully, "I am in charge of this aircraft, but if you'd like to speak with Airline management—" "Not Airline management," Isabella interrupted. "I mean actual management. People who understand customer hierarchies. People who understand that some passengers deserve better treatment than others." The cabin fell silent again. Marcus Rivera felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. In his military career, he'd encountered bigotry disguised as protocol, discrimination wrapped in bureaucracy, hatred dressed up as policy. But this was different. This was someone who genuinely believed that human worth could be measured by bank account balances and social media followers. Customer hierarchies. Marcus repeated slowly. "Yes," Isabella said, sensing that she might finally be getting through to someone. "Exactly. Airlines have to prioritize certain passengers based on their value to the company, based on their importance. Based on—" She gestured vaguely. based on who they are. Simone Rivera felt her husband's tension like electricity in the air. She'd been married to Marcus for 20 years, long enough to recognize when his military training was overriding his civilian politeness. Marcus Simone said quietly, "Maybe it's time." Marcus looked at his wife, then at Isabella Whitmore, then at the crew members who were waiting for direction about how to handle a situation that had spiraled beyond normal customer service protocols. "You're absolutely right," Miss Whitmore, Marcus said finally. "Airlines do have to prioritize certain passengers. They do have to consider passenger value to the company. They do have to make decisions based on who people actually are." Isabella's face lit up with triumph. "Exactly. Finally, someone understands. The question," Marcus continued, "is whether you have any idea who you're talking to." He reached into his jacket pocket again, this time withdrawing a leather business card case. He extracted a single card and handed it to Captain Rodriguez. Captain Rodriguez looked at the card and her face went completely white. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What?" Isabella demanded. "What does it say?" Captain Rodriguez looked at Marcus Rivera with an expression of someone who had just realized they'd been watching a master class in restraint and patience. "Miss Whitmore, I'd like you to meet Marcus Rivera, chairman of Apex Global Holdings." Isabella stared blankly. "What's Apex Global Holdings?" Tommy Santos felt his knees go weak. "Miss Whitmore, Apex Global Holdings is the parent company that owns Meridian Airlines." The livestream comment section exploded with speculation and excitement. 16,000 viewers had just watched a trust fund influencer spend 20 minutes harassing the man who owned the airline she was trying to fly on. Isabella's diamond-encrusted phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the cabin floor. "That's impossible," she whispered. Marcus Rivera looked at her with the expression of someone who had just run out of patience for ignorance and entitlement. "Miss Whitmore, you spent the last 20 minutes telling me and my wife that we don't belong in seats we paid for. You suggested that some passengers matter more than others. You questioned whether we understand airline etiquette and customer hierarchies." He paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the suddenly silent cabin. "So let me ask you a direct question. Now that you know who owns this airline, who owns this aircraft, and who signs the paychecks of every person in this cabin, do you still believe my wife and I don't know our place?" Isabella Whitmore's phone was buzzing so violently with notifications that it sounded like an angry insect trapped in a jar. Her Instagram live stream had attracted over 30,000 viewers, but the comment section had become a digital execution chamber. Screenshots of her confrontation were spreading across Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit faster than her management team could contain them. "I need to call my father," Isabella whispered, reaching for her phone with trembling hands. "Your father is probably already aware of the situation," Marcus Rivera said calmly. "Social media moves quickly these days, and corporate reputation management teams monitor viral incidents in real time." As if summoned by his words, Isabella's phone rang. The caller ID showed Daddy with a heart emoji, but when Isabella answered, Richard Whitmore's voice carried none of its usual indulgent warmth. "Isabella, what the hell are you doing?" "Daddy?" "Thank God," Isabella said, her voice cracking with relief. "I'm being attacked on this airplane. These people are trying to humiliate me, and the crew won't help. I need you to call the airline, and I've been watching your live stream." Richard interrupted, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Along with 30,000 other people. Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Isabella blinked in confusion. "What I've done, Daddy, I'm the victim here. These people stole my seat, and when I tried to get proper customer service, you harassed paying customers for 20 minutes while live streaming discriminatory comments to the internet," Richard Whitmore said flatly. "You've made our entire family look like entitled bigots, and you've created a public relations disaster that could cost my company millions in lost contracts." The cabin fell silent except for the ambient noise of the aircraft and Isabella's increasingly panicked breathing. "But Daddy, these people, they don't belong in first class. They don't understand airline hierarchies. They're not important like—" "Stop talking," Richard commanded. "Stop talking immediately. Do you know who Marcus Rivera is?" Isabella looked at Marcus with growing horror. He says he owns the airline, but that's impossible. It's not impossible, you spoiled idiot. Marcus Rivera is the chairman of Apex Global Holdings, which owns majority stakes in 6 major airlines, including Meridian. He's worth more than my entire company, and you just spent 20 minutes live streaming yourself discriminating against him and his wife. The phone call was being broadcast through Isabella's live stream, which meant 30,000 people were listening to Richard Whitmore realize that his daughter had just committed social and financial suicide on live television. Marcus Rivera watched this development with the detached interest of someone who understood corporate damage control. Miss Whitmore, perhaps this would be a good time to end your live stream. No, Isabella said, desperately clutching her phone. I need people to understand what really happened here. I need them to see that this is discrimination against me. Dylan Torres was no longer actively filming. He'd lowered his camera and was watching his employer's complete breakdown with a mixture of horror and fascination. For 3 years, he'd enabled Isabella's behavior by documenting her confrontations with service workers and turning her tantrums into viral content. This was the first time he'd watched her face someone who couldn't be intimidated, bought, or manipulated. Isabella Dillon said quietly, "You need to stop. This is getting worse every second you keep talking." Dillon, whose side are you on? Isabella whirled on him, her carefully styled hair beginning to come loose from its chignon. You work for me. You're supposed to protect me, not I work for you, Dillon agreed. But I don't work for racism. I don't work for classism. I don't work for treating people badly just because you can afford to. The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. Dylan Torres, her loyal assistant who had documented every luxury vacation and designer shopping spree for 3 years, was abandoning her in her moment of greatest crisis. Meanwhile, at Meridian Airlines headquarters, CEO Robert Archibald was dealing with the worst public relations nightmare of his career. His phone was ringing constantly with calls from board members, investors, and news outlets, wanting statements about the viral incident involving Isabella Whitmore and Marcus Rivera. "Sir," his assistant said urgently, "we have major news outlets requesting interviews about the incident. CNN, Fox Business, MSNBC, they're all calling. And Sir, Mr. Rivera's legal team just contacted our legal department. They're requesting complete passenger manifests, crew schedules, and incident reports for the past 6 months." Archibald felt his stomach drop. When Marcus Rivera's legal team requested operational data, it usually meant someone was about to be fired, sued, or both. Back on Flight 447, Captain Rodriguez was trying to maintain professional composure while watching her industry's most powerful owner deal with a passenger who had just live-streamed herself into infamy. "Meister Rivera," Captain Rodriguez said carefully, "what are your instructions for proceeding?" Marcus looked at Isabella, who was still holding her phone and streaming to an audience that had grown to nearly 40,000 viewers. "Miss Whitmore, you have a choice. You can end this live stream, accept alternative seating arrangements, and allow this flight to continue normally. Or you can continue broadcasting your behavior and face whatever consequences emerge from this situation." Consequences. Isabella's voice was reaching a pitch that made several crew members wince. "What consequences? I'm a paying customer. I have rights. You have exactly the same rights as every other passenger," Marcus interrupted calmly. "No more, no less. The question is whether you're prepared to exercise those rights responsibly." Simone Rivera had been watching the confrontation with the professional detachment of someone who'd spent 15 years dealing with entitled teenagers and their enabling parents. "Isabella," she said gently, "this is your opportunity to show some grace, to acknowledge that you've made mistakes and try to make them right." "Mistakes?" Isabella stared at Simone as if she'd suggested jumping off the airplane. "I haven't made any mistakes. I demanded proper customer service from an airline that takes my family's money. I refuse to be disrespected by passengers who don't understand what Marcus asked quietly. Isabella's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. "Who don't understand that some passengers are more valuable than others, that some people deserve better treatment because of who they are, what they contribute, how important." She stopped mid-sentence as she realized that every word she spoke was being broadcast to 40,000 people who were documenting her meltdown for posterity. Miss Whitmore Marcus said with infinite patience, "You keep talking about passenger value and importance. You've suggested that airline service should be based on hierarchies that have nothing to do with tickets purchased or policies followed. You've implied that my wife and I don't belong in seats we paid for because we don't meet some standard of importance that you've invented." He paused, letting her words hang in the cabin air. "But here's what I find interesting. You've never once asked what I do for a living. You've never inquired about my background, my contributions to the aviation industry, or my relationship with this airline. You've made assumptions based entirely on appearance and prejudice." Isabella's live stream audience was approaching 45,000 viewers, and hashtag Isabella Whitmore was trending on Twitter with increasingly brutal commentary about her behavior. "I don't need to ask what you do," Isabella said desperately. "I can see what you are. I can see where you belong." "I can see what can you see?" Simone asked sharply, her principal's voice cutting through Isabella's hysteria. Isabella looked around the cabin wildly, suddenly aware that she was surrounded by people who were documenting every word she spoke. The airline crew Dylan, with his reluctant camera, 45,000 live stream viewers, and the owner of the airline himself. "I can see people who don't understand luxury travel," Isabella whispered, but her voice carried clearly through the cabin's expensive sound dampening. Marcus Rivera smiled sadly. "Miss Whitmore, I've been traveling in luxury aircraft since before you were old enough to have a passport. I've consulted on the design of premium cabins for 6 major airlines. I've personally reviewed the service protocols that govern every aspect of first-class travel." He gestured around the suite where they stood. "More importantly, I own this airline. I own this aircraft. I approve the policies that govern how passengers are treated, how seats are assigned, and how crew members handle customer service situations." Isabella's face went completely white. "So, when you tell me that I don't understand luxury travel, that I don't belong in first class, that I don't know my place, you're not just insulting a fellow passenger, you're insulting your host." The live stream audience erupted with comments, reactions, and shares as the full scope of Isabella's mistake became clear to everyone except Isabella herself. "This is a setup," Isabella whispered. "This is some kind of corporate conspiracy to humiliate me." Marcus Rivera looked at her with something approaching pity. "Miss Whitmore, the only person who has humiliated you today is you." The moment of truth arrived not with dramatic music or flashing lights, but with the quiet buzz of Marcus Rivera's phone receiving a text message. He glanced at it, nodded slightly, and looked up at the cabin full of people who were about to witness the complete reversal of everything Isabella Whitmore believed about power privilege and social hierarchy. Miss Whitmore Marcus said calmly, "My legal team has just confirmed that your live stream has been viewed by over 50,000 people in the past hour. Screenshots of your comments have been shared across every major social media platform, and major news outlets are beginning to pick up the story." Isabella's face cycled through several shades of pale as she processed this information. Her social media career was built on viral content, but this was viral in exactly the wrong way. That's good," she stammered. "People need to see how airlines treat VIP customers. They need to understand that you spent an hour harassing the owner of the airline while live streaming discriminatory comments to the internet," Marcus interrupted gently. "They need to understand that when you talked about passengers knowing their place, you were talking to someone whose place is at the top of this company's organizational chart." Dylan Torres had stopped pretending to film professionally. He was now openly documenting Isabella's meltdown with the fascination of someone watching a natural disaster unfold in real time. Isabella Dillon said quietly, "You need to end this stream. You need to apologize. You need to—" "I need nothing." Isabella's voice cracked like a whip through the cabin. "I need people to understand that this is a setup, that this man isn't really who he says he is, that this is some kind of elaborate prank designed to humiliate me." She sat down uninvited in the chair across from their table, Dylan reluctantly continuing to film. Isabella's Instagram live stream was already attracting thousands of viewers, the comments flowing faster than Dylan could read them. Captain Rodriguez felt her patience reach its absolute limit. Miss Whitmore, I've personally verified Mr. Rivera's identity through our corporate security protocols. He is exactly who he says he is. You are exactly who you've shown yourself to be. And this aircraft cannot remain on the ground indefinitely while you process reality. Simone Rivera had been watching Isabella's breakdown with the professional concern of someone who'd spent 15 years helping teenagers navigate emotional crises. But this was different. This wasn't a confused adolescent acting out. This was an adult woman who had never learned that actions have consequences. Isabella Simone said gently, "This is your last opportunity to show some dignity. To end this stream, apologize to the people you've harassed and accept that you've made serious mistakes." Mistakes, Isabella's voice reached a pitch that made several passengers in nearby suites peer through their curtains. The only mistake was booking with an airline that allows passengers like you in first class. The words hung in the cabin air like toxic gas. Every crew member went completely still. Dylan Torres lowered his camera entirely. The live stream audience of 50,000 people exploded with outrage. And Marcus Rivera looked at Isabella Whitmore with an expression that somehow managed to combine disappointment, pity, and absolute finality. "Passengers like us," Marcus repeated quietly. "Yes," Isabella said desperately, as if doubling down on discrimination might somehow save her from the consequences of her behavior. "Passengers who don't understand the hierarchy of air travel. Passengers who don't realize that some people deserve better treatment than others. Passengers who need to learn their place in the Miss Whitmore." Marcus's voice cut through her tirade like a blade through silk. "I want to make sure I understand your position completely. You believe that airline service should be based on social hierarchies rather than purchased tickets. You believe that some passengers deserve better treatment than others based on who they are rather than what they've paid. You believe that my wife and I should learn our place because we don't meet your standards of importance." "Yes," Isabella said, as if she'd finally gotten through to someone. "Exactly. Finally, someone understands." "I understand perfectly," Marcus said softly. "You've just explained in front of 50,000 live stream viewers and a cabin full of airline employees that you believe commercial aviation should operate according to racial and social hierarchies that determine passenger worth based on appearance and prejudice." Isabella's mouth opened and closed silently as the full weight of what she'd said settled into her consciousness. "More importantly," Marcus continued, "you've revealed that these beliefs are so fundamental to your worldview that even when confronted with evidence that you're wrong, even when told explicitly who I am and what I own, you chose to double down on discrimination rather than admit you made a mistake." At Meridian Airlines headquarters, CEO Robert Archibald was watching Isabella's live stream with the horrified fascination of someone witnessing his company's reputation implode in real time. Emergency board meetings were being called. Public relations firms were being contacted. Legal teams were being assembled. But most importantly, Marcus Rivera's office had just sent a formal notice that Apex Global Holdings was initiating an immediate operational review of all Meridian Airlines customer service policies and procedures. Sir Archibald's assistant said urgently, "Mr. Rivera's legal team is requesting complete access to our training materials, customer service protocols, and incident reports for the past 2 years. They're also requesting detailed information about any special arrangements we've made for the Whitmore family." Archibald felt his career flash before his eyes. Special arrangements for VIP customers weren't necessarily illegal, but they became problematic when those arrangements enabled or encouraged discriminatory behavior toward other passengers. Back on Flight 447, Isabella Whitmore was finally beginning to understand that her social media live stream had documented the complete destruction of her privileged life. 50,000 people had watched her reveal herself to be exactly the kind of person that corporate America spent millions trying to distance itself from. "This isn't over," Isabella said desperately. "My father will sue. My lawyers will prove that this was discrimination against me. My followers will your followers are watching you discriminate against other passengers in real time, Dylan Torres said quietly. Isabella, look at the comments. Really look at them. Isabella grabbed her phone and scrolled through the live stream comments for the first time since the confrontation began. What she saw made her knees go weak. Thousands of comments calling her racist. Thousands more calling her entitled. Screenshots of her worst moments being shared with captions about privilege and accountability. Major social media influencers posting reaction videos criticizing her behavior. Corporate sponsors beginning to distance themselves from her brand. This isn't fair, Isabella whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. Marcus Rivera looked at her with something approaching compassion. Miss Whitmore, you've spent the last hour showing 50,000 people exactly who you are. They've watched you harass airline employees, discriminate against fellow passengers, and reveal beliefs that most people find morally reprehensible. He paused, letting her process the scope of what she'd done to herself. The consequences you're facing aren't unfair. They're inevitable. This is what happens when privilege meets accountability in the age of social media. Isabella looked around the cabin one last time at the crew members who were staring at her with professional disgust at Dylan, who had finally stopped enabling her behavior at the passengers whose travel experience she destroyed with her entitled tantrum. I want off this plane, Isabella whispered. Captain Rodriguez nodded to her crew. Miss Whitmore will escort you back to the terminal immediately. Your luggage will be returned and you'll be placed on our airline's no-fly list pending investigation. No-fly list? Isabella's voice cracked. You can't ban me from flying. I have important places to be. I have commitments. You have exactly what you've earned, Marcus Rivera said with quiet finality. Nothing more, nothing less. As security officers boarded the aircraft to escort Isabella Whitmore back to the terminal, her Instagram live stream finally ended. 53,000 people had watched a masterclass in the difference between borrowed privilege and earned respect. The last comment before the stream cut off read, "When keeping it entitled goes wrong." Isabella Whitmore's removal from Flight 447 took exactly 7 minutes and was witnessed by 53,000 livestream viewers before Dylan Torres finally ended the broadcast. Security officers from JFK Airport's Port Authority escorted her through the jetway while she alternated between demanding to speak to supervisors and insisting that the entire incident was an elaborate setup designed to humiliate her. This is discrimination, Isabella repeated as officers guided her through the terminal. This is revenge. This is corporate conspiracy. But her protests fell on deaf ears because by the time she reached the gate area, videos of her confrontation were already spreading across every major social media platform. Twitter was exploding with #Isabella Whitmore hashtags. TikTok users were creating reaction videos. Reddit threads were dissecting every aspect of her behavior with the surgical precision that only anonymous internet users could provide. Meanwhile, back on Flight 447, the cabin had fallen into an almost supernatural calm. Marcus and Simone Rivera had returned to their champagne and their anniversary celebration, but the crew members were processing what they'd just witnessed with varying degrees of shock and admiration. "Mr. Rivera, Tommy," Santos said quietly as he refreshed their drinks, "I just want to apologize." For Tommy Marcus interrupted gently, "You handled that situation with perfect professionalism. You remained calm, followed protocols, and protected the safety and comfort of all passengers. That's exactly what I hope to see from Meridian Airlines crew members." Tommy felt a wave of relief wash over him. For 40 minutes, he'd been terrified that his career was ending in the crossfire between an entitled influencer and an unknown passenger. Learning that the unknown passenger owned the airline and approved of his handling of the situation felt like winning the lottery. Captain Rodriguez appeared in their suite doorway, her expression mixing professional respect with obvious curiosity. "Mr. Rivera, I apologize for not recognizing you earlier. Our passenger manifests don't typically include They shouldn't include special notations, Marcus replied. My wife and I prefer to travel as regular customers. It's the only way to truly understand the service experience we're providing. Simone squeezed her husband's hand under the table. After 20 years of marriage, she was finally seeing the full scope of what Marcus had built during his post-military career. So, when you said you owned some interests in aviation, Marcus smiled sheepishly. I may have understated things slightly. Slightly, Simone stared at him. You own the airline, Marcus. You own this airplane. You own? She gestured around the luxurious suite. How much of the aviation industry do you actually control? Before Marcus could answer, his phone buzzed with an urgent call from his legal team. Excuse me, he said to Captain Rodriguez and Simone. I need to take this. The conversation was brief but intense. Marcus listened, asked several pointed questions, and gave what sounded like very specific instructions about corporate procedures and public relations protocols. What was that about? Simone asked when he ended the call. Damage control, Marcus replied grimly. Isabella Whitmore's live stream reached over 100,000 total viewers when you include shares and reposts. Major news outlets are picking up the story. Our public relations team is fielding interview requests from CNN, Fox Business, and the Wall Street Journal. Captain Rodriguez felt her stomach drop. Sir, how serious is this for the airline? Marcus considered the question carefully. That depends on how we respond. This incident has given us an opportunity to demonstrate our commitment to equal treatment for all passengers. Or it could become a public relations disaster if we're seen as enabling discriminatory behavior. At Meridian Airlines headquarters, CEO Robert Archibald was discovering exactly how expensive Isabella Whitmore's tantrum was about to become. Emergency board meetings had been called. Public relations firms were being retained. Legal teams were being assembled. But most damagingly, corporate sponsors were beginning to distance themselves from any association with Isabella Whitmore's brand. Her father's technology company was facing questions about their corporate culture and values. Her social media management team was frantically trying to contain the viral spread of her meltdown. Sir Archibald's assistant reported, "We've had 12 major corporate clients call to express concerns about our customer service policies. They want assurances that their employees won't face discrimination when traveling on our aircraft." Archibald rubbed his temples. "What's our legal exposure significant?" His general counsel replied grimly. Miss Whitmore's comments were clearly discriminatory, and she made them while being provided service by our airline. We could face complaints with the Department of Transportation Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and multiple state civil rights agencies. Meanwhile, at Whitmore Technologies, Richard Whitmore was dealing with his own crisis. His board of directors had called an emergency meeting to discuss the viral video of his daughter harassing airline passengers while making discriminatory comments. Richard, his lead board member, said bluntly, "Your daughter just live streamed herself into becoming a liability for this company. Major clients are asking questions about our corporate values. Our stock price is down 12% since the video went viral." Richard Whitmore felt 20 years of careful reputation building crumbling around him. "What do you recommend? Complete separation? Public disavowal? Charitable donations to civil rights organizations? And hope that the public doesn't associate her behavior with our company culture." Back on Flight 447, Dylan Torres was processing his own career implosion. For 3 years, he'd documented Isabella's privileged lifestyle, turning her confrontations with service workers into viral content that earned millions of views and substantial advertising revenue. Now, those same videos were being re-examined through the lens of Isabella's discriminatory meltdown. Social media users were sharing clips of her previous incidents, highlighting patterns of entitled behavior that had been celebrated as fighting for respect, but now looked like targeting of working people. Dylan's phone was buzzing constantly with messages from other influencers, talent management companies, and documentary filmmakers who wanted to know if he had additional footage of Isabella's behavior behind the scenes. Mr. Rivera Dylan said quietly, approaching Marcus and Simone's suite, "I owe you an apology. For 3 years, I've been documenting Isabella's behavior without questioning whether what she was doing was right. I enabled her treatment of service workers because I needed the job, but that's not an excuse. Marcus looked at the young man with interest. What will you do now? I'm going to use my footage to create a documentary about privilege, entitlement, and accountability in social media culture, Dylan replied. I want to show people how easy it is to enable bad behavior when you're afraid of losing income or status. Simone smiled at him. That sounds like a much better use of your talents. As Flight 447 finally prepared for departure nearly 2 hours behind schedule, the full scope of Isabella Whitmore's consequences was becoming clear. She'd been banned from Meridian Airlines pending investigation. Her social media accounts were hemorrhaging followers. Corporate sponsors were terminating contracts. Her father's company was distancing itself from her publicly. Most importantly, she'd provided the aviation industry with a perfect case study in how not to treat fellow passengers, airline employees, and basic human dignity. Marcus Simone said as their aircraft finally began to taxi toward the runway, "Do you think she'll learn anything from this?" Marcus considered the question while watching JFK Airport slide past their window. People like Isabella Whitmore usually learn only when the consequences become more expensive than the behavior. Today might have been expensive enough. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom as they approached the runway. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I apologize for our departure delay, but I'm pleased to report that we're now cleared for takeoff. Our flight time to Milan will be approximately 8 hours, and we expect smooth skies for the entire journey." She paused, then added something that wasn't in the standard announcement script. "Here at Meridian Airlines, we are committed to ensuring that every passenger, regardless of background appearance or social media following, receives respectful professional service. Thank you for flying with us, and congratulations to Mr. and Mrs. Rivera on their 20th anniversary." The announcement drew spontaneous applause from passengers throughout the aircraft who had heard about the confrontation through crew member whispers and social media posts. Marcus raised his champagne glass to his wife as the aircraft lifted off from JFK. "To 20 years," he said. "To teaching entitled people that actions have consequences," Simone replied with a grin. As Flight 447 climbed toward cruising altitude, Isabella Whitmore was sitting in a JFK Airport security office, waiting for her father's lawyers to arrive and trying to process how her perfect life had imploded in less than 2 hours. Her phone showed 847 missed calls, 12,000 new Instagram comments, and exactly 0 messages of support from anyone in her wealthy social circle. The last notification before she finally turned off the phone was a news alert. Meridian Airlines stock rises 3%, after viral video shows commitment to equal treatment. Even in her disgrace, Isabella Whitmore had managed to make Marcus Rivera richer. Within 6 hours of Isabella Whitmore's viral meltdown reaching 1 million total views across all platforms, Meridian Airlines CEO Robert Archibald found himself sitting across from Marcus Rivera in a JFK Airport conference room that smelled of stale coffee and existential dread. Marcus Archibald said carefully, using the first name of a man who could fire him with a phone call, "I want to personally apologize for the service breakdown that occurred on Flight 447. Marcus Rivera sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable as he reviewed a thick folder of documents that his legal team had compiled in the hours since the incident. The folder contained Isabella Whitmore's complete travel history with Meridian Airlines crew incident reports, customer service training materials, and what appeared to be a very damaging pattern of preferential treatment for entitled passengers. Robert Marcus said quietly, "Explain to me how Isabella Whitmore flew with us 12 times in the past year, made complaints about fellow passengers on 6 of those flights, and was never once asked to modify her behavior." Archibald felt sweat beading on his upper lip as he reviewed the incident reports that his customer service team had tried very hard to bury. Isabella's complaints read like a catalog of discrimination disguised as luxury service expectations. She complained about inappropriate passengers in first class, Archibald admitted. She requested that certain passengers be moved because they didn't meet her standards for premium cabin service. She made demands about crew assignments based on her comfort level with staff members. "And how did we respond to these complaints?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "We accommodated her requests," Archibald said quietly. "Her father's company has significant contracts with our parent holding group. Customer service was instructed to provide white-glove treatment for the Whitmore family." Marcus closed the folder with the careful precision of someone who had just confirmed their worst suspicions. "So, for 12 months we enabled Isabella Whitmore's discriminatory behavior because her father's money made her harassment complaints disappear. Marcus, you never intended to create a two-tier customer service solution where wealthy passengers could discriminate against other travelers." Marcus's voice remained calm, but Archibald recognized the tone of someone whose patience was approaching absolute zero. "You never intended to train crew members that certain passengers' complaints mattered more than others' right to equal treatment." The silence in the conference room was deafening. "Show me the training materials," Marcus said. Archibald reluctantly slid another folder across the table. The customer service training protocols made for deeply uncomfortable reading. Instructions for handling VIP passenger concerns included language about maintaining appropriate cabin atmospheres and ensuring that premium customers weren't disturbed by incompatible passenger demographics. Marcus read through the materials with the clinical attention of someone conducting an autopsy on corporate ethics. These training materials explicitly instruct crew members to accommodate passenger requests for seating changes based on their comfort level with other travelers. "It's industry standard practice. It's institutionalized discrimination," Marcus interrupted. "You've created official policies that allow wealthy passengers to exclude others from first-class cabins based on prejudice disguised as preference." At that moment, Simone Rivera entered the conference room fresh from a shopping trip through JFK's luxury retail corridors. She'd been giving her husband space to handle the corporate response to Isabella's meltdown, but her principal's instincts told her this was exactly the kind of meeting that benefited from educational oversight. "How bad is it?" Simone asked, settling into a chair next to Marcus. "We've been enabling discrimination for at least a year," Marcus replied, sliding the training materials toward his wife. "Possibly longer." Simone read through the documents with the horrified fascination of someone who'd spent 15 years fighting exactly this kind of institutional bias in educational settings. "These policies would be illegal in any public school district in the country. They're problematic in commercial aviation, too," Marcus said grimly. "Robert, I need you to explain how senior airline executives approved training materials that explicitly accommodate racial and social profiling by passengers." Archibald looked like a man who was watching his career flash before his eyes. "Marcus, the aviation industry operates in a competitive environment where customer satisfaction scores drive profitability. When high-value customers make complaints, we're incentivized to address those concerns quickly and completely. Even when those complaints are based on discrimination, even when those complaints are difficult to address through standard procedures." Marcus Rivera had served in combat zones where split-second decisions determined whether people lived or died. He'd built a business empire by recognizing patterns that others missed, and he'd married an educator who had taught him to identify problems that created inequality through institutional design. What Meridian Airlines had done was create a solution that allowed wealthy passengers to purchase immunity from having to share space with people they didn't want to see. "Robert, here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, with the tone of someone issuing orders rather than suggestions. "Every employee who enabled Isabella Whitmore's discrimination will be terminated immediately. Every training material that accommodates passenger prejudice will be rewritten completely. Every customer service policy that creates different treatment based on passenger wealth will be eliminated permanently. Marcus, it's going to require a complete cultural transformation of this airline." Marcus agreed, "and it's going to start immediately." He opened his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Legal implement full operational takeover protocols for Meridian Airlines, effective immediately. I want complete management restructuring policy, rewrite, and staff retraining. timeline is 90 days maximum. Archibald felt his world collapse in real time. Marcus, you can't just, I can do exactly what I want. Marcus replied calmly. I own this company. And after watching one of our passengers live stream discriminatory harassment to 1 million viewers while being enabled by our crew, I've decided that complete restructuring is the only appropriate response. Meanwhile, across the airport, Isabella Whitmore was discovering that her viral infamy had consequences extending far beyond airline travel. Her talent management agency had terminated their contract. Her primary social media sponsors had pulled their agreements. Her father's company had issued a public statement distancing itself from her behavior and announcing a $5 million donation to civil rights organizations. But, most devastatingly, she was learning that viral shame in the social media age was permanent, global, and searchable. Miss Whitmore, her father's lawyer, said carefully, I need to explain your current legal exposure. The incident was broadcast live to over 50,000 viewers and has now been viewed more than 1 million times across platforms. You made explicitly discriminatory statements while being provided service by a commercial airline, creating potential liability under federal civil rights laws. Isabella stared at the lawyer as if he were speaking in a foreign language. But I didn't do anything illegal. I just demanded proper customer service. You harassed fellow passengers based on their appearance and repeatedly suggested that they didn't belong in first-class accommodations because of who they were. The lawyer replied grimly. You live-streamed this behavior while explicitly discussing passenger hierarchies based on social and racial characteristics. Those aren't racial characteristics, Isabella protested. Those are customer service categories. Some passengers are more important than others. That's just business reality. The lawyer exchanged glances with Isabella's father, who was sitting in the corner looking like a man who had just watched his reputation implode on a live television. Isabella Richard Whitmore said quietly, You need to understand something. The man you harassed for an hour isn't just another passenger. Marcus Rivera owns the aviation industry. He has the power to ban you from flying on any major airline in North America. More importantly, he has the moral authority to destroy our family's business relationships across multiple industries. He can't do that, Isabella whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. He can do exactly that, her father replied. And based on your behavior today, he would be completely justified in doing it. Back in the airport conference room, Marcus Rivera was outlining his expectations for Meridian Airlines' transformation with the precision of someone who had spent his career turning failing operations into success stories. Every crew member will receive comprehensive sensitivity training focused on equal treatment, regardless of passenger demographics, Marcus said, reading from notes he'd been making while reviewing the airline's policies. Every customer service protocol will be rewritten to eliminate accommodations for discriminatory requests. Every VIP program will be restructured to provide enhanced service without enabling harassment of other passengers. Marcus Archibald said desperately, these changes will require massive retraining, policy development, and operational restructuring. The costs will be enormous. The costs of enabling discrimination are higher, Simone interjected. You've just spent a year training your employees that wealthy passengers can exclude others based on prejudice. Do you have any idea how many potential travelers you've lost because they didn't feel safe or welcome on your aircraft? Marcus nodded toward his wife. Simone has spent 15 years implementing equity initiatives in educational settings. She'll be consulting on our cultural transformation process. Archibald realized that he was watching the complete reconstruction of an airline by a power couple who had the authority, expertise, and moral conviction to actually pull it off. What about Isabella Whitmore? Archibald asked. Miss Whitmore is banned from all Apex Global Holdings transportation services pending legal review, Marcus replied. More importantly, her behavior has provided us with a perfect case study for training purposes. Every employee will watch footage of yesterday's incident as part of their bias prevention education. You're going to use her meltdown as a training video. We're going to use her meltdown as an example of exactly the kind of behavior that our company will never tolerate or enable again, Marcus said firmly. Isabella Whitmore thought she could purchase the right to discriminate against other travelers. Instead, she provided us with the perfect opportunity to demonstrate our commitment to equal treatment for all passengers. As the meeting concluded, Archibald realized that Isabella Whitmore's entitled tantrum had triggered the most comprehensive airline industry reform in decades. Her live-stream discrimination had become the catalyst for changes that would affect millions of travelers and thousands of employees across multiple airlines. Her behavior had also made Marcus Rivera significantly richer, as Meridian Airlines' stock price continued to rise on news of the company's commitment to equality and inclusive service. In trying to exclude others from first-class accommodations, Isabella Whitmore had accidentally funded the creation of a more equitable aviation industry for everyone. 3 months after Isabella Whitmore's viral meltdown destroyed her privileged life, Marcus and Simone Rivera were finally taking the anniversary trip to Italy that had been interrupted by an entitled influencer's discrimination spree. They sat in the same Suite 1A where the incident had begun, but everything about their travel experience had changed. Tommy Santos, now promoted to Chief of Customer Experience for Meridian Airlines, approached their table with the warm professionalism that had impressed Marcus during the original confrontation. Mr. and Mrs. Rivera Tommy said with genuine pleasure, "Welcome back to Meridian Airlines. I'm honored to personally ensure your anniversary celebration is everything you dreamed it would be." Tommy Marcus replied, "I told you before, when I'm traveling as a passenger, I'm just Marcus. Save the executive treatment for when I'm conducting official business." Tommy grinned. "Sorry. Force of habit." The new training protocols emphasize respectful service for all passengers, but old instincts die hard when you're serving the man who transformed the entire aviation industry. The transformation Tommy referenced had been swift and comprehensive. Within 90 days of Isabella's incident, Meridian Airlines had become the industry standard for equitable customer service. Employee training focused on dignity for all passengers. VIP services provided enhanced amenities without enabling discrimination. Customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs as travelers recognized they could fly without fear of harassment from entitled passengers. "How's the new position treating you?" Simone asked. "It's the best job I've ever had," Tommy replied honestly. 3 months ago, I was afraid that entitled passengers could destroy my career with viral videos. Now, I work for an airline that protects employees who stand up for equal treatment. I wake up excited about going to work. Captain Elena Rodriguez appeared in their suite doorway, her uniform bearing the new insignia of Senior Captain for Equity and Safety, a position Marcus had created specifically for officers who demonstrated both technical excellence and moral leadership. "Good morning," Elena said warmly. "I wanted to personally welcome you aboard and let you know that this flight represents everything we've accomplished since the Whitmore incident. Every crew member has completed comprehensive bias prevention training. Every policy has been rewritten to ensure equal treatment, and every passenger can expect the same level of respect and service regardless of their background or bank account." Marcus smiled at the professional pride in Elena's voice. "How are the other airlines responding to our policy changes?" "They're scrambling to catch up," Elena replied with satisfaction. When the industry's most successful airline makes equity a business priority, everyone else has to follow or risk being seen as discriminatory. We've essentially forced the entire aviation industry to choose between profit and prejudice. The transformation hadn't been limited to Meridian Airlines. Other carriers, faced with passenger demands for equal treatment and corporate accountability, had implemented their own bias prevention programs. The aviation industry's competitive dynamics meant that Meridian's success with equitable service forced competitors to abandon discriminatory practices or lose market share. As Flight 447 prepared for departure on time and without incident, Simone reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed since Isabella Whitmore's meltdown. "Do you ever think about her?" Simone asked her husband as they settled into their seats for the long-delayed anniversary flight. Isabella Marcus considered the question while watching ground crews prepare their aircraft with the precision that had made commercial aviation the safest form of travel. "Sometimes. I wonder if she learned anything from the experience. The answer to that question was complicated. Isabella Whitmore had spent 3 months discovering what life looked like when privilege could no longer shield her from consequences. Her social media career was over not just because she'd lost followers, but because no brand wanted to associate with someone who'd live-streamed discriminatory harassment to 1 million viewers. Her father's technology company had survived the scandal, but only after donating millions to civil rights organizations and implementing comprehensive diversity and inclusion programs. Richard Whitmore had learned that corporate success required more than just profits. It required moral leadership that extended to family members who represented the company in public. Isabella herself had been forced to confront a reality she'd never imagined, life without inherited privilege protecting her from the consequences of her behavior. She was currently working as a customer service representative for a small travel booking website, earning $12 an hour, helping people plan vacations she could no longer afford. The job was honest work, something Isabella was experiencing for the first time in her 29 years of existence. "I think she's learning," Dylan Torres said during a phone call with Marcus Rivera 2 weeks earlier. Dylan had completed his documentary about privilege and accountability in social media culture using 3 years of Isabella footage to examine how wealth could insulate people from basic human empathy. "She's not the same person who harassed you on that airplane," Dylan continued. Working in customer service, dealing with difficult people earning her own money, it's forced her to see the world from a completely different perspective. The documentary, titled The Fall of Isabella Whitmore, a case study in privilege and accountability, had become required viewing in business ethics courses at major universities. It used Isabella's live-streamed meltdown as a starting point for examining how social media wealth and entitlement created toxic combinations that hurt both privileged individuals and the people around them. Has she apologized? Marcus had asked. "She's tried," Dylan replied. "She sent letters to you, your wife, Tommy Santos, Captain Rodriguez, and everyone else she harassed. But her lawyers advised her not to make public statements that could increase her legal liability." Isabella's legal troubles had been resolved through a combination of financial settlements and community service requirements. She'd been required to complete 500 hours of customer service training in hospitality and transportation industries, learning to treat service workers with the respect she'd never shown them during her privileged life. But perhaps the most significant consequence was that Isabella Whitmore had become a cautionary tale used throughout corporate America to train employees about the costs of discriminatory behavior. Her live-streamed meltdown was shown in sensitivity training sessions across multiple industries. Business schools used her case study to examine how privilege could blind people to their own bigotry. Social media management companies used her story to warn influencers about the permanent consequences of viral shame. Isabella Whitmore had achieved the fame she'd always wanted, but as an example of everything wrong with entitled culture, rather than everything right about luxury lifestyle. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to someone is losing everything that was never really theirs to begin with, Simone said, as their aircraft climbed toward cruising altitude above the Atlantic Ocean. Marcus nodded, watching the sunrise paint the clouds in shades of gold and orange. Isabella Whitmore spent 29 years believing that her worth was determined by her father's money and her social media followers. Maybe losing those things will help her discover who she actually is underneath all that inherited privilege. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom as they reached cruising altitude. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're now at our cruising altitude of 39,000 feet, with clear skies and smooth air for the remainder of our flight to Milan. Our flight attendants will be beginning beverage service shortly, and I'm pleased to report that every member of our crew is committed to ensuring that every passenger, regardless of background, nationality, or seat assignment, receives the respectful professional service that makes flying a pleasure rather than an ordeal." She paused, then added something that wasn't in any standard announcement script. "For those passengers who may have heard about recent changes in our industry, I want you to know that here at Meridian Airlines, we believe that dignity and respect aren't luxuries that can be purchased. They're basic human rights that every traveler deserves. Thank you for flying with us, and congratulations to all passengers celebrating special occasions today. The announcement drew applause from passengers throughout the aircraft, not just for the professionalism of the crew, but for the recognition that commercial aviation had been transformed into a more equitable experience for everyone. As Tommy Santos served their anniversary champagne, Marcus raised his glass toward his wife. To 20 years of marriage, he said. To learning that sometimes the most important victories happen when entitled people finally face consequences for their behavior, Simone replied with a smile. As their aircraft flew through clear skies toward Italy, Isabella Whitmore was beginning her shift at the customer service call center, helping frustrated travelers resolve booking problems and learning one difficult conversation at a time that treating people with respect wasn't about hierarchy or status. It was about basic human decency. Her entitled life was over. But for the first time since her live-streamed meltdown, Isabella Whitmore was beginning to discover who she might become if she learned to earn respect rather than demanding it. The transformation of an industry had begun with one woman's viral tantrum. Its completion would require one woman's quiet journey toward understanding that privilege was never a substitute for character. Justice Marcus Rivera reflected as he watched clouds drift past. Their window wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about forcing people to finally grow up. The sunset over the Tuscan countryside painted the sky in shades of amber and rose as Marcus and Simone Rivera sat on the terrace of their anniversary hotel, finally enjoying the celebration that had been interrupted by Isabella Whitmore's entitled meltdown 3 months earlier. Their table overlooked rolling vineyards and olive groves that had witnessed centuries of human triumph and struggle. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we just moved to different seats? Simone asked, swirling wine that cost more than most people spent on groceries but less than they'd paid for the ruined anniversary trip that started this journey. Marcus considered the question while watching Italian families gather for evening meals in the village below. Children played in cobblestone squares while grandparents shared stories on ancient doorsteps. It was the kind of scene that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with travel in the first place. Not the luxury accommodations or premium services, but the opportunity to witness how people lived, loved, and treated each other across cultures and continents. If we'd moved seats, Isabella would have learned that harassment works, Marcus replied thoughtfully. She would have continued believing that money gave her the right to exclude people she didn't want to see. Tommy Santos would have learned that corporate policies mattered more than passenger dignity, and thousands of future travelers would have faced the same discrimination we experienced. Simone nodded, understanding that their confrontation with Isabella had been about something much larger than airplane seating. In my 15 years as a principal, I've learned that the moment you accommodate a bully's demands is the moment you teach them that bullying works. Isabella needed someone to finally say no. The question is whether she learned anything from it, Marcus said. The answer to that question had arrived that morning via an email that Dylan Torres had forwarded from Isabella's personal account. The message was simple, direct, and notably lacking in the self-aggrandizing language that had characterized her social media persona, Mr. and Mrs. Rivera. I know my lawyers advised me not to contact you directly, but I needed to say something that can't wait for legal clearances. 3 months ago, I was a horrible person who treated you with inexcusable disrespect because I believed my money made me more important than you. I was wrong about everything. About airline hierarchies, about passenger worth, about human dignity, and about who I thought I was. Working in customer service has taught me what you tried to show me on that airplane, that treating people with respect isn't about their bank account or social media following. It's about recognizing that everyone deserves basic human dignity regardless of their background. I can't undo what I did to you, but I want you to know that your patience with my behavior taught me more about character than 29 years of inherited privilege ever did. I'm sorry for how I treated you, your wife, the airline crew, and everyone else who witnessed my meltdown. You had every right to destroy my life completely, but instead you used my behavior to create positive changes that will help other travelers avoid the discrimination I tried to inflict. Thank you for showing me that real power isn't about excluding others, it's about lifting them up. Isabella Whitmore Marcus had read the email twice before showing it to Simone, who'd analyzed it with the professional eye of someone who'd spent her career evaluating whether teenagers' apologies reflected genuine remorse or strategic manipulation. I think she means it, Simone had concluded. The language is too simple, too direct, too self-aware to be public relations posturing. This reads like someone who spent 3 months thinking seriously about who they want to become. Now, sitting on their hotel terrace as the Italian countryside settled into evening tranquility, Marcus felt something that had been tightly wound in his chest since the airplane incident finally began to relax. "You know what I realized today," Marcus said, reaching across the small table to take his wife's hand. "This whole experience wasn't really about Isabella Whitmore. It was about us." Simone raised an eyebrow. "How do you mean?" "For 20 years, I've built businesses and accumulated wealth while trying to stay invisible. I've owned companies and controlled industries while living like a regular person from Brooklyn. I've had the power to create change but used it quietly behind the scenes without taking credit or accepting recognition." Marcus paused, watching an elderly Italian couple walk hand in hand through the vineyard below their terrace. Their movements spoke of decades of shared experience, mutual respect, and the kind of love that deepened rather than faded with time. "Isabella forced me to use my power publicly," Marcus continued. "She forced me to stand up and say that discrimination is unacceptable, that money doesn't determine human worth, that respect is something everyone deserves, regardless of their background. And in doing that, she forced me to become the kind of leader I always knew I could be, but was too comfortable hiding from." Simone squeezed his hand. "You've always been that kind of leader. I've watched you for 20 years, Marcus. You've never treated anyone badly because you could afford to. You've never used your success as an excuse to look down on other people. You've never confused wealth with worth. But I also never used my platform to create the kind of changes that could help other people," Marcus replied. "I stayed quiet, stayed invisible, stayed comfortable. Isabella Whitmore, horrible as her behavior was, forced me to step into the spotlight and use my influence to make the world a little more fair." The transformation that had emerged from Isabella's viral meltdown extended far beyond airline policies. Marcus had established the Rivera Foundation for Travel Equity, providing scholarships for underrepresented students to study aviation hospitality and transportation management. The foundation also funded bias prevention training for service industry workers and legal support for travelers who faced discrimination. More importantly, the incident had inspired other business leaders to examine their own industries for practices that enabled discriminatory behavior. Hotels, restaurants, retail chains, and service companies across multiple sectors had implemented equity training and policy reforms designed to ensure equal treatment for all customers. "Do you think we changed anything meaningful?" Simone asked as the sun disappeared behind the Tuscan hills, leaving them in the warm glow of the hotel's terrace lighting. Marcus considered the question while thinking about Tommy Santos, now leading customer experience initiatives that had transformed airline travel for millions of passengers. About Captain Elena Rodriguez, whose leadership in equity and safety had become a model for aviation professionals worldwide. About Dylan Torres, whose documentary was helping business schools teach future leaders about the importance of moral courage in corporate settings. "I think we learned that staying silent in the face of injustice isn't really staying neutral," Marcus replied. "When you have the power to create change and you choose not to use it, you're choosing to enable the status quo." Isabella Whitmore taught us that comfortable neutrality is just another form of complicity. As they prepared to return to their room, the same suite they'd booked 3 months earlier for an anniversary trip that had been derailed by an entitled influencer's discriminatory tantrum, Simone reflected on how much their lives had changed since that confrontation. "I'm proud of us," she said simply, "not for having money or owning companies or being able to afford luxury travel. I'm proud that when someone tried to use their privilege to hurt other people, we chose to stand up and say that wasn't acceptable." Marcus nodded as they walked hand in hand through the hotel's ancient corridors past stone walls that had witnessed centuries of human drama, triumph, and transformation. 20 years of marriage, Marcus said as they reached their suite. And the best lesson we've learned is that real love isn't about protecting each other from difficult situations. It's about facing those situations together and using them to become better people. Simone smiled as she opened the door to their room, where rose petals had been scattered across Italian linens and champagne chilled in crystal buckets. The anniversary celebration they'd planned 3 months earlier was finally happening, but they were different people now than they'd been when they first booked this trip. To 20 more years, Simone said, as they settled onto their private balcony overlooking the Tuscan countryside. To using whatever privilege we have to make the world a little more fair for everyone else, Marcus replied, raising his glass toward his wife and the star-filled sky above them. Their anniversary trip was finally perfect, not because of the luxury accommodations or premium service, but because they'd learned that the most important journey isn't to distant destinations, but toward becoming the kind of people the world needs more of. 1 year after Isabella Whitmore's live-streamed meltdown changed the aviation industry forever, Marcus Rivera stood before an audience of airline executives, customer service professionals, and civil rights advocates at the International Conference on Transportation Equity. The annual gathering had been created in direct response to the incident on Flight 447, bringing together industry leaders who were committed to ensuring that travel remained accessible and dignified for all passengers. When my wife and I boarded that aircraft for our anniversary celebration, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the conference hall. We had no idea that we were about to participate in one of the most important customer service lessons of the modern era. The audience, representing airlines, hotels, restaurants, and service companies from 6 continents, listened with the focused attention of professionals who understood that the story of Isabella Whitmore had become a business school case study in how privilege and prejudice could destroy careers, companies, and entire industries if left unchecked. Isabella Whitmore taught us that silence in the face of discrimination isn't neutrality, it's complicity, Marcus continued. When we have the power to create change and we choose not to use it, we become part of the problem we claim to oppose. The transformation that had emerged from that single airplane incident continued to ripple through multiple industries. The Whitmore Protocol's comprehensive bias prevention training programs developed in response to her viral meltdown had been implemented by major corporations across North America and Europe. Customer service standards had been elevated industry-wide as companies recognized that treating all customers with dignity wasn't just morally correct, it was profitable. Isabella herself had requested to address the conference via video message, a request that Marcus had supported despite some industry leaders' concerns about providing her with a platform. Her image appeared on the conference hall's main screen, showing a woman who looked dramatically different from the entitled socialite who had harassed airline passengers 12 months earlier. Isabella's hair was styled simply, she wore minimal makeup, and her clothing reflected someone who earned her money through actual work rather than inherited privilege. "My name is Isabella Whitmore," she said, her voice carrying none of the entitled arrogance that had characterized her social media persona. 1 year ago, I live-streamed myself discriminating against fellow passengers because I believed my father's money made me more important than other human beings. The conference hall remained completely silent as Isabella continued. I was wrong about everything. About customer service, about human worth, about what it means to deserve respect. Working in actual customer service for the past year has taught me that dignity isn't something you can purchase. It's something you either give to others or you don't possess yourself. She paused, looking directly into the camera with an expression of someone who had spent months examining her own behavior and finding it lacking. To the Rivera family, to the airline crew I harassed, and to everyone who witnessed my meltdown, I'm sorry. Not because my lawyers told me to apologize, but because I finally understand that the person I was that day was someone I never want to be again. Isabella's final words addressed the broader industry audience. If my viral breakdown helps companies create policies that prevent other travelers from experiencing the discrimination I tried to inflict, then something good will have come from the worst day of my life." The video ended to respectful applause, and Marcus returned to the podium to deliver the conference's closing message. "True power," Marcus said, "isn't about what you can take from others. It's about what you give them: respect, dignity, opportunity. The moment you use your privilege to exclude rather than include, you reveal that you never understood what real strength looks like." He gestured toward the diverse audience of industry professionals who had spent 3 days learning about inclusive service practices, bias prevention protocols, and the business benefits of treating all customers as valued human beings. "The changes we've implemented across our industries aren't just moral improvements, they're competitive advantages. Companies that embrace equity and inclusion don't just serve customers better. They attract better employees, create stronger cultures, and build more sustainable success." Marcus paused, thinking about Simone, who was back in Brooklyn, serving as principal of a school that had become a national model for educational equity. She declined to attend the conference, preferring to focus on the daily work of creating opportunities for young people who needed advocates more than she needed recognition. "My wife often reminds me that real change happens one interaction at a time," Marcus continued. "Every customer service conversation, every passenger boarding experience, every moment when someone in authority chooses to treat another person with dignity, these individual decisions aggregate into cultural transformation." The conference concluded with the presentation of the annual Isabella Whitmore Award for Customer Service Excellence, a recognition that she had specifically requested be named after her as a permanent reminder that privilege without wisdom was meaningless, and that the worst moments in our lives could become the foundation for our most important growth. This year's recipient was Tommy Santos, whose leadership in customer experience innovation had made Meridian Airlines the industry standard for equitable service. In his acceptance speech, Tommy reflected on the lessons learned from that turbulent day when an entitled passenger's meltdown became the catalyst for industry-wide reform. "6 months ago, I was afraid that difficult customers could destroy my career," Tommy said. "Today, I work for a company that protects employees who stand up for equal treatment and dignity. That transformation didn't happen because of policies or procedures. It happened because 2 passengers chose to maintain their dignity under pressure, and 1 business leader chose to use his power for justice rather than revenge." As the conference participants departed to implement new equity initiatives in their home companies, Marcus reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with champagne and anniversary celebrations in Suite 1. Isabella Whitmore's entitled tantrum had accidentally created the most comprehensive civil rights advancement in modern transportation history. Her discriminatory live stream had educated millions of people about the importance of treating all travelers with respect. Her viral meltdown had funded scholarship programs, bias prevention training, and policy reforms that would protect future generations from the harassment she had tried to inflict. Sometimes, justice arrived, not as punishment, but as education. Sometimes the worst human behavior became the catalyst for the best human progress. And sometimes a spoiled socialite's 30-minute tantrum could change an entire industry's understanding of what customer service really meant. Marcus Rivera had learned that quiet dignity, when confronted with loud prejudice, possessed the power to transform not just individual lives but entire cultures. His anniversary trip had been delayed by discrimination but completed by justice. The skies were finally clear for everyone. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and chosen to stay silent? Have you ever seen someone use their privilege to hurt others and wondered if speaking up would make a difference? This story reminds us that justice doesn't require perfect heroes. It just requires ordinary people who refuse to let wrong behavior go unchallenged. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that their voice matters. Hit that like button if you believe that dignity and respect should be available to everyone, not just those who can afford first-class tickets. Subscribe to our channel because we're committed to bringing you stories that show how ordinary people can create extraordinary change. Leave a comment telling us about a time when you stood up for what was right, even when it felt scary. Your story might inspire someone else to find their courage. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss a story where justice prevails and entitled behavior finally meets its match. Because the next time someone tries to tell you that you don't belong somewhere you've earned the right to be, you'll know exactly how much power your quiet strength really possesses. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most important battles are won not with loud voices, but with unshakable dignity.